Good evening, everyone. I'd like to go over this week's activity-based costing exercise. I will be including a blank template, as shown in this video, on the Collaborate Sessions link for everyone to use as a template for their homework assignments. If you've already submitted your assignment and you have all the numbers accurate and it's not in this specific template, that'll be fine. There won't be any deduction for that. But I think just providing you a template will make it a little easier to get through the calculations and the journal entries. So the intent behind this exercise is to compare traditional overhead allocations with activity-based costing. The first two steps on your homework are asking you to calculate the overhead using machine hours, which is the traditional method that we went over last week, and then calculating the unit cost using that traditional method of overhead. So if you'll see in the template under current system and the solution, I've broken it out where you're just going to plug in the numbers under regular and yogurt dipped, and keep in mind that you may want to add a total here in column E so that you have a combined total between regular and yogurt dipped frozen yogurt. So in row 34 we're going to be calculating the budgeted overhead, and that is actually already given to you above, so there's no change there. You're going to just copy the budgeted overhead from row 10 into row 34. The expected activity and machine hours is also already provided to you in the above example. And then here they're asking for the overhead application rate. And what that is you're going to calculate how much in dollars for overhead would you allocate to each machine hour. In order to calculate the overhead application rate, you're going to take the budgeted overhead and divide it by the expected activity, and that'll give you an overhead application rate. You'll do that for both regular and for yogurt dipped. In the overhead applied section, what it's asking for is, now that you've calculated a rate, multiply it against the number of machine hours, and that'll give you the total overhead that you would actually apply or estimate for this process, and you'll enter that in row 37. The direct materials already given to you above. The direct labor is also given to you, and in row 40 we're going to sum the direct materials, the direct labor, and the overhead applied to arrive at a total cost. So remember that when we're trying to determine the unit cost, we've got to sum the total cost and divide it by the number of units produced, and that's given to you in row 15. That'll give you your unit cost using the traditional current method of machine hours as your overhead application base. In activity-based costing, you're determining a cost driver. In this case, that was setup hours. So for questions 3 and 4, to solve them, you're going to just follow through the same process. You'll enter in your budgeted overhead for both regular and yogurt dipped, which is given above, the expected activity and setup hours, which is also given above. And again, for the overhead application rate, you're trying to divide your budgeted overhead by your expected activity to get a rate. The difference is in how you apply that overhead. For row 48, you're going to take your overhead application rate and you're going to multiply it times your setup hours, which is given in row 18. You'll do that for regular as well as for yogurt dipped. And then you'll follow the process exactly the way it was in the current system. Direct materials is given, direct labor is given. You'll sum the three between overhead applied, direct materials, and direct labor to get a total cost. Once you have your total cost, you'll divide it by the number of units produced to get a unit cost for regular and for yogurt dipped. And And that's pretty much the solution for questions 1 through 4. The last portion of this exercise is to do the journal entries. I've given you the templates here. I know there was some challenges. We will be assuming in this exercise that the units have sold, and so there is going to be a requirement for the cost of goods sold. For work in process inventory and your raw material inventory, make sure that you're adding the direct materials for both regular and yogurt dipped, and that should be the total number that you're crediting, that you're reducing the raw material and you're adding to the WIP. The same would apply for labor and overhead. You're going to make sure that you add across both on regular and yogurt dipped. Remember that when we're applying overhead, there's usually a difference between what you've applied or estimated versus your actual. The problem above does give us the actual overhead. Sum, again, you're going to sum both regular and yogurt dip to get a total actual overhead and compare that to what you've calculated as your applied overhead. The difference is going to be adjusted in your final journal entry for cost of goods sold and manufacturing overhead. So this concludes my explanation on activity-based costing for exercise 3A2. I hope that by having me kind of walk through it and provide you the template, it'll make it a lot easier to follow and understand the process. And really what it all boils down to, we all have these overhead expenses. They're very difficult to trace directly to a product, and it's a matter of determining how you want to apply the amounts and overhead to each of your products and what cost drivers you would do to do that. In a very homogeneous type environment, it would make sense to use something homogeneous like machine hours or direct labor hours if that's applicable to all the products. When you have variations, for example, in terms of setup hours, some products require a small amount of setup while other products require a long period of setup, then it makes sense to use activity-based costing so that you're allocating the right amount of overhead costs to each product. I thank you for your time. I wish you the best of luck with this assignment. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions. Good night.